Hey everybody. Well, in week 3 after this week, we are officially done with half the term. So I'm going to try to get through some stuff and frame the week out for you. The main assignment that we're going to be doing revolves around a piece of writing named Girl that was written by Jamaica Kincaid. She's an amazing writer. Girl is shorter than one page. So that's, from a reading perspective, it'll make working and analyzing it fairly simple. But it's packed with all sorts of literary goodies. So we're going to be writing a literary research essay on it. Think of this assignment as your midterm. It'll be 4 pages, 7 sources, MLA works cited pages, and it'll include secondary sources, 2 of which you will need to find on your own, aside from anything that I've provided. I've done my best to lay out the module in order from top to bottom on how I would approach it. I provide a lot of kind of supportive material around the essay, including highlighting several potential topics and definitions and questions around those topics. You can use multiple topics for this essay. My fair warning is that don't spread yourself too thin. I think using 1 or 2 topics would be ideal. I think 3 would be too much. Feel free to pick your own topics as well. You can lean into methods that we've already explored, right? You can lean into feminist theory and sociology theory. I'm trying to just give you plenty of room to write and explore in a way that will personally interest you, while keeping kind of the tenets of effective literary research. So, and before we really get going, there's a really quick assignment, and I'm going to just go by majority rules on it. We're moving at an accelerated pace. We're covering 6 weeks, the 16-week course in 6 weeks, and I'm just kind of wondering if people are feeling stressed out with the amount of coursework to the point where you think it's having a negative impact on your learning process. So sometimes less can be more, and I need to rely on you to know if that's the case right now. So if more than 50% of you are feeling this way, then we will cut out the Highway 99 reading for the week, so that it would take out about 50 or 60 pages of reading. I want to push you, right, to absorb a lot, but I don't want to push you so hard that you actually absorb less. So please just kind of fill out that simple, quick assignment and tell me how you're feeling. The other thing I want you to know is I don't expect you to be perfect. Perfect is often kind of boring. I often enjoy when you take risks in your writing, even when it falls short of your intentions for the piece. So do I want coherent and effective writing? Yes, of course. But it's okay if you make some mistakes, especially when you're trying to reach for something and challenge yourself. So I think of it, would you rather see an Olympic diver kind of do a fairly easy dive perfectly, or would you rather see an Olympic diver try something really challenging and end up kind of landing not so perfectly, right? So I personally often prefer to see the challenging one. That the class is not called Who Can Write a Technically Perfect Essay, right? So it's a critical thinking class. All of you passed English 122, so I trust that you can write an essay. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I rather enjoy the critical thinking part when students go deeper into their own thoughts. In other words, I would rather have a technically flawed essay that tries, right, than a technically sound essay that's redundant, derivative, or risks nothing. So every topic in this week's module that sits on the left-hand margin, right, that's switched over to the side, is related to that literary research essay, right? So there are 7 tabs this week that sit on the left-hand margin, and all of them kind of go through that literary research essay. So I will read from some of those things now, right? So from the whole module, right? In terms of the 2 versions, right? One of the assignments asks you to look at 2 versions of the same poem and how the poem physically represents itself. So how many periods are in the piece, right? So that's something that you can notice. How does that add to the meaning? I don't want to give it all away, but if you think of a period as a pause, right? What's it like when someone speaks to you without pausing, right? And how does that fit into the overall message of the piece, right? In the one version, why is it in the shape of a box, right? How does it feel when everything is rigid or boxed in, right? So the physical form of the poem, think about how the shape can kind of help add and create more meaning. How does this picture, in the one version, there's a picture of somebody hanging clothes, change the communication, and also just the surrounding images of kind of everything that's going on in the web browser. So the main thing that we're going to explore this week is literary research, which is actually a little bit more complicated than it sounds, but it's not crazy or anything. To me, it sounds like, oh, cool, we're just going to learn to look up a few things. Literary research is a whole thing, right? And the literary research that you will be doing is on that one-page piece, Girl by Jamaica Kincaid, right? So at least the page is short, right? So your literary research will be presented in an academic essay form, unless you want to do some sort of like cool video performance. I'm totally up for that too. With literary research, let's start from the top. What even is literary research? Literary research involves the investigation and study of literature with the aim of gaining a deeper understanding of it. It typically involves things like examining a text in detail, interpreting a literary text, exploring themes, exploring literary elements like symbolism, examining literary devices, and investigating the historical and cultural contexts in which the work was written, right? So that's not a complete list, but some of the common things associated with literary research. So literary research often entails reading and critically evaluating primary and secondary sources, right? Primary sources, the primary source of this assignment is the actual piece, Girl. That's the primary source. Secondary sources are things like books, articles, essays, and scholarly commentaries, right? That are normally, not always, but often, they're things that relate exactly and explore the primary piece, right? Right, secondary sources, you use them to gain information and form arguments. On a professional level, defining literary research contributes to literary criticism, academic discussions, recovered texts, and new insights into literature. So again, we're all going to do a literary research on Girl by Jamaica Kincaid and present that literary research in a 4+ page essay. That essay, again, requires MLA format, proper works cited page, minimum 7 effective citations. So think of this as, it's not easy, but kind of think of it as a midterm, right? So you'll get through it, and it might suck, but honestly, that piece is so rich and detailed that you actually might have a good time exploring and writing about it. So what even are the steps to literary research, right? So there's no set in stone approach, but there are some common approaches, and here are some of them. And I just kind of made a list. Again, it's in the module 1, selecting a topic, right? You can choose a specific literary topic or just kind of questions that you come up with that interest you, right? So here are some literary topics in Girl, right? So any of these topics or combo of topics, I think, could make a great essay. Again, just don't spread yourself too thin by picking too many topics. So for this essay, narrow and deep is better than shallow and wide. So think of it like you're digging a well and you're not digging out a swimming pool. So some of those literary topics include gender rules and expectations, cultural transmission and oral traditions, authority and power dynamics, the internal monologue, and intergenerational influence. Personally, I see the poem as an internalized monologue. So I see it as not there being another person there, kind of like an echo of past trauma that's still in the speaker's mind. I read the poem as if only one person is present, and this kind of reading allows psychological exploration and analysis. Other topics: language and communication, right? Symbolism and or literary elements. And another one would be stylistic choices and narrative flow, right? So one example of stylistic choices and narrative flow would be how many periods are in the piece, right? And why. Also things like pacing, rhythm, alliteration, right? So those are just ideas. You can take one if it speaks to you. You can also find your own literary topic, or you can come up with some question that interests you and kind of go from there. If you don't know what some of those literary topics are, you could do a Google search, ask me to further explain them. I will try to post an overview in the module, and I did. So I ended up being able to do that. So read Girl, pick a topic or area of interest, and then start reading the piece again with a more critical eye that relates to the topic you picked or the question or thing that you want to explore. So that for one. Two, background reading. Conduct preliminary reading to familiarize yourself with the existing scholarship, theories, and critical perspectives related to your topic. I would read the piece several times. Give yourself a break in between the reading. If this was mine, I'd probably end up reading about half a dozen times. I'd read it out loud a couple times. I'd also see if I could find a video of Jamaica Kincaid reading it herself. Maybe some of you don't need to read it quite as much. Who knows? So, but read it with the topic or area of exploration in mind, right? So at that point, I would highlight and annotate things that I found interesting and relevant in the piece. I would make notes. I would gravitate towards the things that interest me the most. Remember, you can examine elements such as plot, characters, themes, symbolism, narrative structure, and stylistic choices. Once I felt familiar with the reading and my understanding and interests in it, I would start doing some secondary source research, right? So there's a topic in this week's module that covers some aspects of secondary sources and finding them. I provide some secondary sources for you. I also kind of want you to find some of your own. I think for most of you, using Google Scholar and just the internet to find literary criticism and analysis and secondary sources, I think that'll work well. So I would then start reading credible secondary sources. And you want them to be good. You want them to kind of have their own references or works cited pages. What you don't want to do is pull up information from like the My Pillow Guy website and cite that as a secondary source. So, and don't be tempted to grab the very first thing that you see on the internet as a source either. Keep track of your topic and the secondary sources that add to your topic. Secondary source review. So, just gather secondary sources to kind of gain insight, gather insight, contextual information, right? Like, what's the context of the piece? What's Jamaica Kincaid's background? What were kind of the environment that the piece was written in, and different perspectives related to your research question. Analysis and interpretation, probably. So analyze your collected data and develop interpretations and arguments based on your research topic or your questions and your primary and secondary source findings. Sometimes the secondary source, we get into it, we start looking at, we research, and it has a pretty big influence on our writing. That's okay. It's okay to change topics, or to either change them completely or to kind of tweak our thesis to sort of meet our new interests in what we found in the secondary sources. So that's really common. Sometimes it doesn't happen and sometimes it does. At this point, probably a good time to organize relevant data, quotes, and evidence from primary and secondary sources to support your analysis, your explorations, and your arguments, right? So think about your thesis. Think about how you want to present your information, right? In what order. And at this point, you might really start putting an outline together. So you've read the piece, you've kind of gone through the piece, you've highlighted and annotated, you've found things in the primary source, right? You've developed kind of questions or arguments that you want to explore. You've looked at secondary source material and sort of sorted through it and found things that are useful. And at this point, you probably want to put an outline together. And of course, once you have an outline together, right, you want to structure the outline so that there's a logical flow of ideas and just a sensible presentation of your argument or explorations. After that, you draft, right? You write a rough draft. You start plugging in your kind of sites and incorporating the analysis, the supporting evidence. At that point, once you have a draft, I would work kind of hard to get a peer review, right? Often it's helpful to get feedback on our papers. You can seek feedback from peers. I'll set up a little conversation that everybody can freely participate in. Get a smart sibling to read it. Maybe don't get the ones that aren't that smart to read it, right? Parents, professors, tutors, right? Just to kind of look things over on the draft. This is all stuff that I think most of you know. After that, clean it up, finalize it, and submit it. So I think the main things to remember is A, read the piece. B, pick a topic. C, read and analyze the piece with the topic in mind. D, include secondary research that benefits and or explores your topic. E, do an outline. F, rough draft. G, feedback if you can. And then H, the final submission. So there's a whole part that goes into what secondary sources are in more detail. Secondary sources are works that analyze, interpret, or discuss primary sources, right? So a primary source, for example, is the book or poem or story that you read, right? In our case, the primary source is Girl, right? Secondary sources are things that are not the primary source, but that provide things like commentary, exploration, evaluation, or analysis on the original material, right? So it's often not the case, but sometimes the primary source author can also provide a secondary source for their own work, right? They might explain it. So in the module, I give you examples of secondary sources. Right, so for example, if Star Wars is the primary source, right, the secondary sources, you could find tons of books that are written about Star Wars that kind of try to help explain the universe, right? So those would be secondary sources. So I include some general examples of secondary source, right? Include books written by scholars, articles published, biographies, review articles, commentaries. I go into that in more detail. Documentary films. Google Scholar, I think, will be a great place to find secondary source material. If you go onto Google Scholar, right, just type in Google Scholar, type in Jamaica Kincaid Girl. On the drop-down, you'll see all sorts of suggestions like Jamaica Kincaid Girl, analysis, gender, feminism, criticism, review. You'll see on the right, a lot of times there'll be like a little PDF link. Those I found to be the most helpful that kind of open up completely and don't try to force you into kind of buying anything or signing up. So again, try to pick what interests you. Yeah. So I also created a topic that says like literary research essay roadmap. So that should be helpful. Right, so some of those things are like, and I use some prompting questions. So under topics that I kind of talked about before, like gender rules and expectations, right? So that topic explores societal norms and expectations associated with gender roles. It delves into how these rules influence the characters in the literary work and how they shape their behavior, right? So relationships and identity, some explorations might include kind of questions like how are gender roles portrayed in the literary work? Are the characters who defy or conform to, do they defy or conform to traditional gender expectations? How do gender norms influence the behavior and choices of the characters? Does the work challenge or reinforce societal gender stereotypes? How do gender rules and pressures influence the society in which the piece is set? How do gender rules and expectations harm people, right? So just in that one kind of topic, you can kind of go through those questions and really flush those out by reading the primary source and then kind of looking for secondary sources to back you up. And I kind of go through a lot of those, and I post questions for each of them. So authority and power dynamics, right? Some of the questions around that could be what power structures exist within the literary work, right? Or even what power structures exist in the context in which it was written. How do the characters exert or challenge authority, or do they? How are they suppressed by authority? Are power dynamics influenced by social class, race, or other factors? How does the abuse or misuse of power affect the characters and their relationships? And again, I kind of go through all these. I'll do one more. So internal monologue, right? And intergenerational influence, right? So that topic involves analyzing the internal thoughts, reflections, and voices of the characters in the literary work. Some of those questions might be like, what insights into the characters' minds and thoughts are revealed through this internal monologue, right? If you think of the whole piece like I do as an internal monologue. How does the character's past trauma or experiences shape their current perceptions? In what way does intergenerational influence manifest in the character's thoughts or behavior? How does the internal monologue contribute to the psychological exploration and analysis of the character? And again, you can kind of explore and you can kind of create your own questions based on those kind of topics. So there is a section that kind of goes through each one of those and poses questions, stylistic choices. Let's see. Yeah, so the code word for today's lecture was it last time? Prestige worldwide. This time the code word is not you, Guillermo. So again, the code word for this week is not you, Guillermo. I will also accept superb owl. So either not you, Guillermo, or superb owl as the code phrase. And if you can tell me what that's from, you will get a little bit of extra credit. Okay, so the other thing quickly is we're going to start reading Under the Feet of Jesus. So hopefully you've all gotten that book. We're going to read the first 92 pages. And this is a lot shorter of an assignment. It's kind of a personal response. One of the things that is helpful in understanding literature is just getting in touch with how you personally feel about what you've read, right? Things like literary analysis can be great for understanding things, but so can our initial impressions and our emotions around them. So, hypothetical situation, let's say you meet someone and you don't know why, but you get kind of like a bad feeling about them. They could be saying all the right things. Let's say like they want to go out with you, but there's something that you can't quite explain through words that makes you feel uneasy, right? So do you ignore those feelings because you can't put reasons behind them, right? Or do you trust your intuition, right, and stay away? Hopefully, you at least sometimes trust your intuition and just stay away. So when we read, how we feel is also often worth listening to, right? Just because we can't always analyze a piece of literature doesn't mean that there's not value in our emotions and our initial reactions towards the work, right? So initial responses and emotions are often the doorways to understanding things, right? So we don't want to just, I know in academia, a lot of times we're encouraged to kind of discount our feelings and our kind of emotions because we can't put them in words, but really deep level reading, you do want to pay attention to your feelings and kind of your initial impressions, and you want to trust your instincts, right? Just like, so when we read, how we feel is often worth listening to, right? Initial responses and emotions are often doorways into understanding things, just like how if someone gives you kind of that initial creepy vibe, right? Often after a while, maybe not right then, but after you kind of sit with it, you can sort of pinpoint the reasons for the creepy feeling, right? So when you read, don't just stay in your head, pay attention to kind of your emotions as well. It's important. Yeah, so here's how I often read. Yes, I use my mind. I pay attention to literary elements. Mainly, I personally enjoy paying attention to symbolism, imagery, and characters, but I also pay attention to what emotions are evoked in me, right? And those emotional parts are often things that I find myself later on the most interested in, right? Because I'm like, why do I feel that way? So later I think about where I had larger emotional responses, and I lean into them and try to figure out why I feel the way that I do. I want to understand why I feel a certain way. And that often is not just enjoyable to me, but illuminating in terms of deeper understanding and analysis. And a lot of reading literature and understanding it and critical thinking is just really, it's just us trying to understand ourselves better and learn about ourselves. So for that one-page assignment, I just want it written in first person, in your natural voice, right? You don't have to get academic on me. Please just tell me the following, right? So one page, casual, in your own personal voice, just kind of explore the following. State and explore what was meaningful, evocative, and evocative just means like bringing strong feelings, memories, or images into your mind. Interesting, exciting, striking in the work that you just witnessed. So read those first 90-something pages. One page, casual, in your own voice. What did you emotionally find meaningful, evocative, interesting, exciting, striking, disgusting, whatever. So, so a personal example of an emotional response that I might write, let's say I read Girl. The first time I read it, I felt like I was being scolded, right? But not an immediate scolding. I didn't feel like someone else was scolding me. I felt it more like an internal thing, right? So a lot of people read that and they think that it's a mother scolding a daughter, and maybe it is, and maybe it's not, right? It never says it's the mother, right? So the way that Girl made me feel drew me to believe that the speaker is actually kind of the girl herself, and that she's just repeating kind of all these internalized like trauma things that she learned as a girl. So maybe things that you ever do that, like you kind of you're doing something and you screw up, and like all of a sudden you hear in your head like your mom or father's critical voice about something, right? So that's kind of how I take it, as this is an adult and she kind of has these memories of all those things kind of playing in her head, like the echoes of past advice or something. That's how I read it. And my emotions towards it in that initial reading, that's what opened it up for me. And that opened up all sorts of psychological interpretations and places that I could take the writing. I could probably, I don't know, I'm sure I could write a 20-page essay on that. So I think that's it. Have a wonderful week. It's midterms. Let me know if you're stressed out. If you are, we'll drop that other piece of reading off. And again, the code word for today is not you, Guillermo. And I will also accept superb owl. And if you know what they're from, you'll get extra credit. So anyways, have a great week. I hope you're all well. All right. Bye. Beep.